The corridor erupted into a kaleidoscope of blaster fire and searing white light. Commander Xylus slammed a fresh thermal clip into his rifle, his massive frame shuddering as a pulse round struck his kinetic barriers. He ignored the warning chimes in his helmet. His only priority was the small, fragile figure crouched behind the still bulkhead at his back. "Stay down." Xylus roared over the din, swinging his weapon around the corner to suppress the advancing squad of elite guards. The hallway smelled of ozone and scorched armor. Dr. Vance didn't scream. She didn't cower. She simply adjusted the seals on her helmet, her movements precise amidst the carnage. Xylus felt a surge of terrifying admiration. This was the famous Terran spirit he had read about in every classified science fiction story in the archives. She reached out, her gloved hand brushing the plating on his arm. Even through layers of combat alloy, the contact sent a jolt through him that had nothing to do with adrenaline. It was the spark of an unbreakable bond forged in the fires of treason. "We need to reach the hangar," she said, her voice calm over the comms. "If we don't, the entire sector falls." Xylus looked down at her masked face. He knew what lay beneath that veil now. He knew that the deadliest weapon on the ship wasn't his rifle, but the woman he was throwing his life away to save. 2 hours earlier, the air on the dreadnought Iron Will had been sterile and cold. Xylus sat in the interrogation block, the metal chair groaning under his weight. As a Sorian shocktrooper, he was used to being the scariest thing in the room. His species were often dismissed as space orcs by the more refined races of the Galactic Council, a label he usually wore with pride. He was an apex predator designed for violence. But the human sitting across from him made his instincts scream in warning. Dr. Vance sat perfectly still. She was handcuffed to the table, wearing a neural dampening veil that covered her entire head, opaque and featureless. She was a Deathworlder, hailing from a planet that tried to kill its inhabitants daily. Yet she looked unassuming. "Remove the helmet, Doctor," Xylus commanded, his voice a low rumble. "No," Vance replied. Her voice was soft, melodic, and utterly devoid of fear. Xylus leaned forward, the servos in his armor whining. "You are a prisoner of the High Fleet. I am not asking. We need to verify your identity before the transfer to the central hub." "The mask doesn't protect me," she said, leaning in until they were inches apart. "It protects you." Xylus paused. He had seen humanity bluff before, but this felt different. There was a strange gravity to her, a pull that made him want to lean closer despite the threat. "Explain," he ordered. Vance tapped her finger against the table. "It is a result of human ingenuity without ethical breaks. My genome was rewritten to be the ultimate diplomatic tool. It releases a hyperpotent pheromone sequence combined with a visual cognitive hazard. It bypasses logic, loyalty, and fear." She paused, the featureless mask reflecting Xylus's scarred face. "Absolute devotion is the deadliest biological weapon. If I take this off, you won't attack me. You will do anything I ask. You would burn the ship, slaughter your crew, and betray your council just to see me smile. Free will ends where my gaze begins." Xylus scoffed, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "You think you can enslave a high commander with a look? She conquers worlds without firing a single shot," Vance whispered. "I am not a soldier, Xylus. I am a living plague of obsession, and your Grand Overseer just ordered me transferred to a population center of 12 billion people." The door to the interrogation room hissed open. A junior officer stepped in, looking flushed and nervous. "Commander Overseer Mortose demands the prisoner," he said. He says he wants to inspect her personally." Xylus looked from the officer to Vance. The officer's eyes were glassy. The HFY files always warned about human unpredictability, but this was something else. This was an extinction event wrapped in a flight suit. Xylus shoved the junior officer aside, gently for a giant, but firmly enough to send him stumbling into the bulkhead. The look in the boy's eyes had been enough. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a hungry, mindless need. The contagion of absolute devotion had already begun to leak, a psychic pressure building against the hull of the Iron Will. Xylus snapped back to the present as a plasma bolt scorched his shoulder plate. The corridor smelled of burning circuitry and high-velocity violence. "Move!" Xylus roared, grabbing Vance by her harness and hauling her toward the hangar bay doors. They burst into the cavernous hangar, the vast emptiness of space visible through the magnetic fields. But they weren't alone. Grand Overseer Mortose stood between them and the blockade runner, flanked by a dozen heavy troopers. But Mortose didn't have his weapon drawn. His arms were spread wide, his face twisted in a grotesque beatific rapture. "Give her to me," Mortose wept, his voice cracking over the loudspeakers. "I must see, I must serve. The council is blind, Xylus. She is the light." The educational archives regarding the paradox of perfect leadership flashed through Xylus's mind. Mortose had surrendered his agency. He wasn't a leader anymore. He was a drone hollowed out by the mere proximity to the biological anomaly standing beside Xylus. This was the dark side of humanity, the ability to dominate not with strength but with a terrifying, weaponized charisma. "She stays with me," Xylus growled. He raised his rifle. For a moment, silence reigned. Not the heavy kind, but the sharp, vibrating tension of a drawn bowstring. Then the air exploded. Xylus moved with a speed that belied his massive bulk. A true apex predator unleashed. He wasn't fighting for the Empire anymore. He was fighting for the concept of free will itself. He triggered his kinetic suppression field, turning his body into a living shield for Vance. He felt her small hands grip the back of his armor, anchoring him. In the chaos, Vance didn't hide. She grabbed a fallen pistol, her aim impeccable as she shot out the hydraulic locks on the blast doors, sealing Morthos's reinforcements out. It was a display of Terran spirit that defied the logic of her containment. She wasn't a damsel. She was a partner. "Get to the cockpit," Vance shouted, her voice cutting through the roar of the alarms. Xylus vaulted into the pilot seat of the stolen interceptor, his claws flying over the controls. Vance buckled in beside him, her masked face turned toward the viewport. As the hangar depressurized, the ship shot forward, a silver dart piercing the blockade, engines screaming as they punched into the lawless fringe of the outer systems. Minutes later, the stars elongated into the comforting streaks of hyperspace. The violence faded, replaced by the hum of the reactor. Xylus slumped back, adrenaline crashing out of his system. He looked at Vance. She was still masked, still an enigma. He realized with a jolt that he had just committed high treason against the Galactic Council to save a woman whose face he could never see. "You can take the cuffs off," Xylus said, his voice rough. Vance hesitated, then keyed the release. She rubbed her wrists, then turned to him. The opaque visor reflected the starlight, but Xylus felt the weight of her gaze beneath it. "You saved me," she said softly. "You know I could order you to fly us back. I could order you to conquer a planet for me." Xylus met her reflection. "But you won't. That is the difference between a weapon and a person." He reached out, his large clawed hand hovering near hers. The electricity was still there, a magnetic pull that scared him more than any blaster fire. It wasn't biological compulsion. It was something rarer, something found only in the best sci-fi tales of old. It was choice. "We are fugitives," Vance whispered, though she didn't pull her hand away. Xylus engaged the autopilot, the ship drifting deeper into the unknown. Better a fugitive with a mind of my own than a king on his knees. He looked out at the infinite expanse of the galaxy. It was dangerous, wild, and uncertain, but for the first time in his life he felt truly free. Please follow my channel for more videos. One click from you can change my life.